Not all pseudoscience folk are obvious nutters, like that Noah's Ark fan club in Kentucky or the Shape of the Planet enthusiasts. Sometimes they show up as mathematicians, taking on all of medicine, biology, genetics, psychology, and every other major discipline that deals with humans to claim all of them are lying to everyone for some nefarious reason about whether minority people are real. Welcome to Factual, where we aggressively exist despite Helen Joyce's protestations. If you're new here, my name is Ember, and I'm an intersex woman of transgender experience, a humanist public speaker, and a pro-science advocate. Thank you for coming back for round two, because this is a two-parter. Part one is linked in the description. This discussion tonight picks up from about halfway through this Times Radio debate between professional patriarchy apologist Helen Joyce and retired physician Helen Webberley, with Joe Coburn hosting. We're just about to get into the puberty blockers and other youth care, so remember to hit the subscribe button, and let's do this.
In terms of the child, let me just continue this thread. Listening to Helen Webberley saying, you should always believe a child, I think you said, listen to a child, and at some point take action. What's wrong with that, Helen Joyce?
I think there's two ways to listen to a child. One is that the child says something like, I think, mummy, I'm really a girl. I'm talking about a boy saying this, eh? And you say, oh, that's interesting. Why do you think that? What do you think the girls can do? What is it that you want to do that you think you can't do as a boy? Because the thing is, you are actually a boy, and that's not going to change. It can't change.
And see, that's not super helpful. Like, even if Helen were correct and you were dealing with a person with a delusion, which we know is not the case when it comes to trans people, because we've tried to treat trans people with the same techniques and medicines that we try to treat people with delusions with, and they don't work because it's not a delusion. But even if it were, that's not how you treat people who are suffering from delusions. The fact a mathematician is willing to go against all of medicine on a subject that she knows nothing about, of course she's willing to go against all of psychiatry about something she knows nothing about. The Dunning-Kruger is off the charts with this woman. But there's a difference between these relatively harmless conspiracy theories like the shape of the earth or its age, because when you're denying people's existence, when you start giving out psychiatric information that is just not true, it's literally medical misinformation, and it is harmful. The Kentucky folk in their big giant ark, they're taking taxpayer money and using it for their cult. That's not great. But Helen Joyce is doing something that's going to get people hurt.
Children are very literal minded. They don't mean this airy-fairy sex and gender are different. And it's very cruel to tell a child they can do something that is actually just not going to be possible. They believe it and they maybe act on it, and then later on it turns out not to have been true.
I mean, do you accept that children change their minds? These are shifting thoughts.
What is essential is two things. One, Helen Joyce in her response, again, completely denies the existence of gender reassignment or gender incongruence. And I think that's a very dangerous thing to let pass. On the other hand, I think it's really important that we listen to children and we understand and we help them explore. But this blanket, no, you cannot be a boy because you are a girl. I've worked with so many children and families. It's crucially and excruciatingly painful for that child to hear their parents say, you can't do this, because the transgender people of today, the adults, have all...
This is functionally no different from a parent who's a member of one religion telling a questioning child, no, you can't be a different religion or have no religion because you are this religion. It's simply fact. It's undeniable reality, and you can never change it. That's how much sense we're talking here. Good parenting, not even just good psychiatry, but good parenting might look something along the lines of, even if your child comes up with something that's completely crazy, maybe go along with them. Maybe they're playing. Maybe they say, you know what, I'm going to be Donald Duck, or I'm going to be a space alien, or whatever it is. What harm from going along with them? And if they are serious about their gender, that's kind of important to know. But at the very least, exploring it together, knowing you have their back, that you're there to support them, that they matter more than your preconceptions about who they should try to be, that makes a big difference in development. Even if you explore together and they find out that it's just not right for them. So what? They've learned whether you're there for them or not.
Been a child. They've all been through that process. And I've heard the ones that have said, my mum said no, 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 or my mum let me explore what gender identity was for me. And there's a huge difference in the outcomes. To how
Right, but
those children develop.
exploring conversations is
Yeah.
one thing, Helen Webberley. Taking action, you said later on, that comes later on. What age, what's the earliest age you would give a child puberty blockers?
When puberty starts.
Which is?
Well,
The youngest age would be?
I think probably around 9 is the earliest, but there will be children earlier because, of course,
So this is a complex issue because there are so many things where we like to draw an arbitrary number. We want to say beyond this point, you can't do this. Beyond this point, you can't do that. Like you can, in some parts of the United States, you can only learn to drive at 16. You can only vote at 18, and so on and so on. That doesn't really work very well in medicine because you're not dealing with populations, you're dealing with individuals. You can't say you can only give this at this age when it's about puberty. You have to wait until puberty starts. Whether it starts early, whether it starts late, you have to deal with puberty when it shows up, not when some arbitrary number comes along. And in fact, puberty blockers exist precisely because sometimes kids start puberty really early, and that can be developmentally disruptive.
don't forget that puberty can start in a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. So we give a puberty blocker to a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old because but people don't seem to think that that's not a problem. They don't think that's a problem. But it's only when it's a transgender child that it becomes a problem. We use puberty blockers across all ages, whenever puberty starts, when it's damaging or inappropriate.
But what do you understand?
Right, and that's true for virtually all other kinds of trans healthcare. When it's used for a cis person, it's not a problem. No one takes any issue with it. No one calls it experimental or even really cares. If you give a puberty blocker to a child who started puberty at a developmentally inappropriate age, then that's fine. That's the medical treatment for that. If you give hormone supplements to a child for whatever reason, whether it's additional growth hormone so that they will get taller and stay roughly in line with their classmates, that's fine. If it's a boy who is low on testosterone and not developing or not having enough energy, then that's fine. If it's a girl who needs birth control, what do you think birth control is? Mostly hormones. So yeah, we will give all kinds of things to cis people without batting an eye. We'll do surgeries too. While it's broadly speaking true that trans kids don't have access to gender-related surgeries until they're either at or very nearly, in some circumstances, 18 years old, cis kids can have those same surgeries much earlier because they're cis kids. For example, gynecomastia, removal, top surgery, breast reduction. That's what that is. But if you're a cis boy, you can have it, whereas a trans boy can't. If you're, say, for example, a beauty pageant contender and you want a breast augmentation with your parents' permission, you can have that. But if you're a trans girl, you can't. For instance,
Informed consent, Helen Webberley.
Informed consent means that you have the informed bit means the information. Right. So the doctor has the medical information, the patient has the personal information. You share that information and you come to an agreement of consent. So informed consent.
But in what world people will be listening to this is a child have or possess the capability to have informed consent at the age of 8?
But we perform medical interventions on children of 8 all the time.
Yes, but with the child asking for it.
But asking what? So you're not allowed to.
Dr. Webberley seems a little bit confused because she is a doctor And so she's thinking of all the other kinds of procedures that no one cares when children have, or no one feels like government should stick their nose in, from appendectomies to tonsillectomies to potentially chemo for cancer. Because when you need medical care, you need the medical care. You can explain the risks to the patient. You can explain the risks to the parents. And then somebody has to decide. But for everything else, life altering, absolutely. But that's fine. How curious.
Ask. It's like a broken arm, cancer treatment, diabetes, respiratory medicine. We're treating children all the time.
No, treating children is one thing. I'm talking about the issue of consent.
Yeah.
That you would take the word of an 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old.
It's crucial to. It's crucial to listen to these children, because I've seen what happens when you don't, and it's really painful.
All right, well, we'll see what happens later on in terms of when you don't. What do you say in response to that?
There's no other treatment that we would give a totally healthy child that disrupts normal physiological development. Puberty is an absolutely crucial process. It's the process that turns children into adults. You know, delaying an early, catastrophically early puberty is not the same as interrupting normal puberty. Everything else.
I hate to say it, but I a little bit agree with Ellen here. The only reason we use puberty blockers for trans kids is for cis parents, to give them peace of mind. For decades, trans kids went directly on HRT. In the 1920s, 1930s, we have records of it in newspapers and journals and diary entries and so many other places, of kids growing up, realizing they're trans, with different words usually, but the same general principle. A person who was told they're a boy and they say, no, I'm a girl. Or a person who's told they're a girl and they say, no, I'm a boy. And they stay with it. They stay persistent through their childhood. And then they start growing up, and then puberty starts happening. As soon as we had access to pharmaceutical grade hormones, that's what people were doing. That's what they were taking. And then a little later on in life, they might get some kind of surgery a little bit later. You may recall the story of Dr. Alan Hart, who was one of the first to receive lower surgery. It was a pioneering process. In those days, it was experimental, although the hormones had been going on for quite some time. And that's what we continued to do up through the 70s, 80s, 90s. And then as puberty blockers came into more common use for cis kids experiencing precocious puberty, we started using them on trans kids. Not because we need to, but because it gave the adults around those trans kids time to get used to their child being a trans child. You can take them away and we'll go back to the old way. It will. Study after study after study has shown that the vast majority of kids who take puberty blockers go on to receive HRT after. And a whole bunch of kids who start HRT wanted puberty blockers, but weren't given access to them. Of the very, very few kids who desist after they get their hands on HRT, there's very minimal changes. It takes years to go through puberty. And then the kids who do have changes, well, thanks to trans medicine, we have the ability to help them detransition. So by all means, take your puberty blockers and shove them right up your nose.
That we do for children is because something isn't working. They've got a broken arm, they've got diabetes, they've got all these other things wrong that Helen Webberley said. This is different. This is taking a child's counterfactual claim. And listen, it's not me that's being mean. It's nature that's being mean here. It is not possible to turn boys into girls or vice versa. It literally isn't possible. So doing this sort of intervention.
Nature begs to differ. Now, we talked about this a little bit in the first part. I don't want to rehash a long discussion that gets covered so many other times. Instead, I'll direct you to the website, betterthanember.com. On the gender site tab, there are fuck tons of studies and research papers and case reports and bio memos and all sorts of things that show lots of species definitely can And depending on what you're talking about with regards to sex, humans can too.
On the basis that you can is just sheer wanton cruelty.
I mean, you were, Helen Webberley, found guilty of serious misconduct.
How is it cruelty to give a child life-saving medical care that they're specifically requesting? In what universe is that cruelty? What is cruel is denying them access to life-saving medical care that has been proven over and over and over to be both safe and effective. What's the problem? Aside from being cruel. Holy shit. Andrew points out puberty blockers are not administered nasally, typically. And yes, that's true. That's true. But the good news is that in Helen Joyce's case, it's much, much, much too late for puberty blockers.
By the General Medical Council, later overturned. And this was over a child that was given puberty blockers by you. You call it a pause in terms of the development to give a child time to think. This
Well,
child
I haven't
was
called it that. I haven't called it that, by the way, but you
well,
put those words into my
well,
mouth.
no, but I have heard you in other interviews because I listened before I did this debate this evening, and that was.
I mean, it's great that she's been in other interviews, but you can't go, what are we doing here? Like, let the woman speak for herself. You brought her on, ask her questions, and let her answer them. And also, kind of important, she just kind of threw that convicted of wrongdoing in there. She was not. Not at least in the case of Gender GP. The charges against her were dismissed.
The word you've used, to give a child time to think. This child was apparently adamant that they didn't want children. How on earth can a child know?
The thing is, I don't think we should base the whole.
How does a cis kid know? Like, I feel like a broken record because this comes up all the time. How can a child know? Well, I mean, you could try asking a trans child. Many of us were trans children. That's the best way to get trans adults, after all. So you could ask a trans child or a person who once was a trans child, but also you could ask a cis child. And in fact, that no one seems to ask the cis kids, are you sure? Because cis people generally don't question their gender because they're cis. But nobody challenges them on that. And going through their endogenous puberty is also a life-altering change.
All of the care of transgender adults, young children, adolescents, adults on one case. So for sure, in the United Kingdom, we don't have adequate standards of care, which is actually what arose the Tavistock travesty, and it's a real problem. So, but I don't think that one case in my GMC tribunal, which, as you say, was overturned.
Yes.
So the High Court found that the GMC were wrong to find that.
But my
serious
question is, how
misconduct.
can a child know?
I just need to you need to allow me to clear my name, because the serious misconduct that you stated from the
I said
GMC
it was overturned.
was overruled. But
Yes.
and also, I don't think that we should base the whole of transgender care for young people.
Right. Like, you can't call yourself a neutral host when you're just throwing out well poisoning like that. Like, you were convicted of serious wrongdoing. No, get out of here. What are you doing? Like, you can't just be like, right. You can't just be like, my bad, which she's not even fessing up to what she just did. Like, you have to acknowledge you were wrong and you have deliberately mischaracterized this woman. Under UK law, this is fucking slander. Impugning a person's reputation on a public broadcast with information that you know is not true. What the hell?
On my tribunal, there's a whole wealth of evidence.
Yes,
out there.
but my question, and just before I come back to you, Helen Joyce, my question is, how can a child know at a young age if they do or don't want children?
Well, Joe, what I reckon you should do really is get the.
Oh, well, this is an interesting one. How can a child know if they do or do not want children? Well, first of all, that has nothing to do with the question, because for one thing, we're getting into subtopics now. We have fertility preservation means available. It doesn't hurt to use them. B, it's very, very hard to reproduce if you're no longer alive to do it by the time you get to reproductive age. So making sure the child lives kind of outranks whether or not they reproduce. And C, reproduction is not the end all be all of life. What the absolute fuck? Like, this is infuriating. This is the same bullshit that grown adult women who can definitely consent to medical procedures are getting their tubal ligations denied over. Oh, you're not 25 yet, or you don't have children yet, or your husband hasn't given permission. What do we mean? Like, all this static about, oh, the kids need to consent, They don't give a fuck about consent, because when adult women consent, they still say, nope, you don't have a right to your own body and your own reproductive system, because a man you may not even have met yet might someday want children from you. But tell me more about how much you care about consent, Miss Joanne.
Parents and the children in here, once you've met as many transgender children and families as I have, and also spoken to adults who once were a transgender child, then maybe you'll change your mind. But for me, at the moment, I'm their spokesperson. And it is true. Transgender people, whatever Helen Joyce says, transgender people exist. There are people who were assigned a sex at birth, which turns out not to be their gender identity. They do exist. And some of those people wish to take medical intervention to switch their hormone profile.
And I'm talking about age and consent and due diligence. But what do you say in response? Let me give you a scenario, Helen Joyce. You're a parent and you have a child that comes to you and says, I want to change my gender, for argument's sake.
Yeah.
That's a bad argument's sake. As Miranda pointed out a while back in the chat, we always are our gender. We're not trying to change our gender. We're trying to get our bodies to more closely align with the gender we have. I realize that's difficult for people like Joe and Helen Joyce to wrap their brains around, but that's much closer to accurate. But also, what any of this has to do, if you've ever met children, you know there are some who definitely want to have kids. That was one of my things when I was very, very small. I wanted to be a mother more than anything. More than anything. It was the one thing about my future I was sure of. So yeah, sometimes kids know they want kids when they get older. And sometimes kids know they do not want kids. My older daughter, from a very young age, was like, I hate kids. I do not want any. She's like, I can't wait until I'm old enough to get my first abortion. Like, she's always been vehemently anti-kid. Sometimes they know, sometimes they don't, and that's fine. Not everybody needs to know about such a life-altering decision from a very young fucking age.
Not as simple as I know, even anecdotally, of a parent saying no, and that's the end of the story.
I'd say, let's talk about that. What do you mean by that? Let's say it's a boy, just so I'm not constantly having to switch. What would be different about your life if people thought you were a girl, or if you were a girl? Is it something you want to do differently? Children have very concrete ideas about things. They think that only boys can do some things and only girls can do some things. Or
I wonder where they get that idea, Helen Joyce. Could it be the patriarchy people who tell them that women are meant to be in the kitchen and pop out babies? Except for the ones who get to be mathematicians and then tell everyone else how they have to live their lives, of course. But for the most part, stay in the kitchen, barefoot and pregnant. Could it be that kind of thing, perhaps?
Just all sorts of, ideas that you need to get to the bottom of. Talking therapy is the right approach here, open-mindedness, but never misleading a child and never using physical interventions for what is clearly a complex psychological issue.
I mean, if someone takes
Sometimes physical interventions are called for, even if a thing is legitimately a psychological issue. Once again, Helen Joyce is a mathematician, not a psychiatrist. She should not be talking on this subject. She knows nothing about it. But I digress. Talk therapy is something of a code word for conversion therapy. It's the latest name they've given it. It's torturing a child until they stop being LGBT, whichever flavor of LGBT. Helen talks a big game about being good friends with lots of gay people like Julie Blindell or whatever the fuck her name is. But she wants to take gender divergent people and send them to conversion therapy under a different name, of course, because we have to keep changing the name of the torture we want to send children to, don't we, Helen? Because once people figure out what she's talking about, you got to change the name again. C'est la vie.
Gender affirming drugs and treatment and later decides it was a mistake. Do you consider that they've been harmed, Helen Webberley?
I will answer your question,
Yeah.
sure. But again, for us to ask a non-medic, someone who's not a counsellor, someone who's not a psychologist, not trained in gender medicine, what is the right thing to do with the child, and for that person to come back and say, oh, well, you just need to talk to them and find out what I mean. We should not be basing our medical decisions in this country on the views of non-experts, which is what we're doing with your guest over there.
That's a solid point, saying Helen's feels and vibes versus the entirety of medical and scientific consensus across every discipline is wild. Like we mentioned in part 1, the fact that they're holding up Helen Joyce as representing one side and Helen Webberley as representing the other side, and in fact presenting it in such a way that it seems like Helen Joyce is representing the majority, when in fact her entire collective is maybe 4 dozen people across continents, whereas Helen Webberley is representing hundreds and thousands of medical professionals. It's not even close to even, but it's presented that way.
To answer the question, you know, one of the clearest examples was the closing down of the Tavistock clinic. Another example was the chief psychiatrist in Finland, who was pioneering hormone treatment for patients, but then over time discovered, as she has written in a lengthy piece, that actually the majority, I think 90%, she said, of the patients that were coming to her were young girls between the ages of 15 and 17 who were asking to change their gender. They were in the wrong body, but they also were suffering from a range of other conditions that spread from autism to anorexia and depression. And she became very concerned and concluded that they were the main issues, and actually changing gender wasn't going to solve it.
Once again, you don't change your gender. I'm not familiar with this particular researcher or her studies. I would point out that people who say these sorts of things, that, oh, it's not really gender dysphoria, it's actually autism, or other ridiculous things, as if, for one thing, it's not possible for a person to have multiple things going on. Imagine a trans child being depressed or developing an eating disorder because they're not psychologically well, because they're being forced to live as a gender other than who they actually are. There's a lot to be said on that count. I'll try to locate this person and see what I can learn about them, but I'm getting big Lisa Littman vibes. Lisa Littman, for those who may not be aware, is a researcher formerly of Brown University who authored a paper about trans people being mostly girls who want to be boys, and that it's can spread through social media rather than a legitimate internal feeling of self being wrong. And she did it not by finding any data, not by speaking to trans kids, but by speaking to not just the parents of trans kids, but specifically the transphobic parents of trans kids. So she started with a sample as biased as she could make it, and the biased sample confirmed her preconceived conclusions. Weird how that works, isn't it? So that paper got retracted. A few years later, another disgraced and discredited former researcher named Michael Bailey, he's gotten into some hot water in the past. He tried to repeat Littman's study by doing the same thing, speaking only to the transphobic parents of trans children, and found the same results, and his paper got rejected and retracted for the same reason, because when you start with biased data, you get untrue results. It sounds like the same sort of thing, because it has the same sort of essential premise, that it's mostly girls, mostly teenagers, who mostly have other problems and are only considering being trans as a way to escape their other issues. But here's the thing. We do know about one person in particular who did exactly that, who had struggles and problems and depression and all sorts of things, and decided to explore being trans as a means to escape the baggage she'd already developed over the course of her life. Her name is Daisy Strongen. And first of all, no one is really convinced she's not actually trans. She detransitioned suddenly when she decided to marry a Catholic and get back in good graces with her family, who are also very, very conservatively Catholic. Actually, I should retract that. I'm not 100% sure they're Catholic, but they are conservative. Not the point. But she still, to this day, posts about how she still dreams about being the boy she was born to be, which sounds pretty fucking trans to me. But whatever. Whether she wants to have a masc body or a femme body, that's entirely up to her, and it's her right to do that. But even if we take her story at face value, that she was trying to escape depression and other psychological issues through transition, she says herself that those years spent as a boy saved her life. She was able to not delete herself through transition. Is it worth it? Is it harmful?
I think we need to be very careful that we're not going on one person's view.
All right, but that's two. That's Hilary Cass at the Tavistock and the
But how come
Finnish
it's okay?
psychiatrist.
That's two. But how come when I, 10 minutes ago, said that the WPATH has over 200 gender experts who've reviewed all of the medical literature and research, and that their publication, The Standards of Care, were peer reviewed? And how come we don't accept that? But it's easy for us to accept that the one case that you hear in the newspapers, or the one, and there have been people at the Tavistock who said a similar thing. But we need to understand the view of multiple experts and not alarmist cases.
Right, that's what they are, alarmist cases, Helen Joyce.
Hilary Cass did the biggest and best systematic evidence review. Riitta Kerttu, Kaltiala in Finland.
She did not do the biggest and best. She did the biggest and best rejection of peer-reviewed evidence based on criteria that's absolutely impossible to do in modern medicine. She also brought forth a whole bunch of bullshit. But one thing she did do, as we mentioned in part one, is while there was, and first of all, Cass review, not peer-reviewed itself, but never mind that. Never mind the political nonsense associated with it. The fact that Hilary Cass was commissioned to produce a report with a specific result. She did, and she was rewarded with a noble title and peerage for doing what she was asked to do. But never mind that. There was a little bit of original research in there pertaining to puberty blockers. And even though she had a vested interest in showing that they're not effective, she still showed they're effective. So if a person with a strong bias to show a medicine does not work, presents you with evidence showing that the thing does in fact work, it might be fair to conclude that it does in fact work. Perhaps.
Done entire population studies. They really don't show anything remotely like gender affirming care being sensible. And if we're going to bring up WPATH, one of the chapters in WPATH Standards of Care 8 is entitled Eunuchs. And it says that people can have a eunuch gender identity. And
right, there are gender neutral people, there are agender people. One specific example might be eunuch, I suppose, but so what?
And that it might be appropriate to intervene if a man says he's a eunuch, for example, to remove his testicles or to give him drugs to make his testicles not work. And what we're hearing is that people have gender identities and that they're able to tell them from the age of 4 or 5. And what I'd like to know is, if a little boy, 4 or 5-year-old, say, says, "Mummy, I don't think I want my willy, I don't think I want my balls," might we say to them, "Oh, WPATH says that you might be a eunuch. There's a eunuch gender identity. It might actually be appropriate to come."
This is more than a little disingenuous, and I hope viewers can tease this out, right? Like listing off a bunch of examples of some of the things that you might consider genders that may not have been considered genders in the past is very, very different from saying, "Oh, little Timmy, maybe he's a eunuch." The fuck are you doing, Helen? Like, this is it's if she were a physician, this would be medical malpractice.
Off your testicles and your willy. I'm not sure yet. We might have to wait a bit and see. I don't see what's wrong with what I'm saying here within the paradigm that Helen Webberley is talking about, where people know who they are, they know who they are.
Once again, we have a 6-year-old saying, "Mummy, Daddy, I don't want my penis and my testicles," and rushing towards the surgery to have them removed. It's just, these small cases that we're citing as examples to throw. But they are.
Point of order, Helen is not citing cases. She's throwing out random hypotheticals that are as ridiculous as she can make them. If there is such a case, then cite it. Don't just hand wave at a hypothetical. Holy shit. Why should we take these seriously? Because this kind of thing is not happening. But also, even if it did, we don't do these kinds of surgeries even on kids who are being affirmed until they're 18, or in some very rare cases, very nearly 18. So what is it? The 6-year-old thing is a complete red herring. What the fuck are we doing? It's just emotional manipulation. The reason they keep bringing up 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds and so forth is to make people think protect the children instead of think about the facts of what's actually being discussed.
Legitimate cases.
No,
That's
I've
an
never
entire
ever.
chapter.
Excuse me. I've never ever met a 6-year-old child come to me and say, I'm a eunuch and I want my penis and testicles cut off." I have met thousands and thousands and thousands of transgender people who identify as a different gender and would like to have gender affirming care, and that care medical intervention isn't needed until puberty. So we hear all these alarmist bottom of the thing cases because we're not talking to true physicians and medical professionals.
My point was really about
Right, and this sort of non-expertise, vibes-based bullshit is what gets all the media attention. Like, what was the last time you saw Helen Webberley on the Joe Rogan show? Not that Joe Rogan is exactly an authority on things, but these topic reporters, these personalities who want to talk about the hot political thing of the day without actually talking about politics directly. Helen Joyce is on shows every single day of every single week. They're mostly right-wing, low-tier podcasts, but she's always out there spreading nonsense. And she's one of the best on their side. All of those people can turn around and be like, "I was talking to Helen Joyce, and she said that 6-year-olds are getting surgeries." And the bullshit just spreads, and it's the telephone game, and it just keeps going and getting more ridiculous all the time.
path being massively important, and experts, over 200 medical experts, yada yada, and yet they bring out a standards of care that has an entire chapter about eunuch gender identity. That's why I don't pay any attention to WPATH and why I prefer to listen to Hilary Cass.
She pays no attention to WPATH, which is why she knows there's a chapter that has a sentence that includes the word eunuch. She's memorized the whole damn thing, but she pays no attention. No. We believe you, Helen.
And to Rita Kurtigaltiana in Finland.
We're going to be back in just a moment and we'll be talking about cross-sex hormones. But first, the news.
Okay, now they're doing a news break. Fabulous. We're not doing the news from however the fuck long ago this was, but I will give you all a quick random break. Shoot, do I have anything that'll play vertically? I don't know if I do. I do, for those of you who are new here, I do a horizontal show every weekday at 11 a.m. Eastern, Learn Together Live. It's less spicy. It's more, learning based. We learn things together live. This past week, we did a whole bunch of ancient stuff, like the oldest temple and the first laws and so forth. And it was very fun. If you're into that sort of thing, remember to hit the subscribe button and join us for those. This coming week, we've got a bunch of spicier subjects, though not this kind of spicy. We're starting on Monday with all about boobies. From mammograms to M cups. We're going to try to cover as much as we can, unlike your girlfriend's bikini. But I digress. I don't know if I have any vertical ads I can play. I could play a horizontal one, and it may or may not work. Yeah, what the hell? Let's give it a shot. Let's take a moment to hydrate. Hey folks, I've been working hard on my health, and so far I've lost over 140 pounds. A huge part of good health is hydration. That's why I'm thrilled to partner with Epic Water Filters. Check this out. Not only can you say goodbye to expensive bottled water, but these filters are made in the US, so no tariffs, and they're made to fit your life. From these lovely pitchers I can fill from, to sink units, to portable filters that fit in your reusable bottle. With Epic, I can refill from nature's water sources and not have to worry about bacteria and whatnot. But also, send back a used filter to be responsibly recycled, and they'll send you a free replacement, saving you and the earth even more. Want to save a ton of money, be healthier, and build a better world? Head to epicwaterfilters.com and enter code EMBER15 at checkout for 15% off. Don't settle for random water. Upgrade to Epic. Hell yeah. All right, we've skipped the news break. We're now ready to go. And while we were away, the Sinister Porpoise sent us a super chat for $2. Thank you, Sinister. And says it was a chapter on eunuchs written by trans women. The eunuchs. You see, it's yes. I always appreciate puns. Thank you, Sinister.
You are listening to the Times Radio Gender Debate with two Helens, Helen Joyce and Helen Webberley. I said we'd talk about cross-sex hormones, and we'll describe, or hopefully two Helens will describe exactly what they are. But the vast majority...
Now, cross-sex hormones is not technically incorrect, but it's also more than a little misleading. It's another term that's intended to bias the listener, because as you are no doubt aware, everyone produces both of the sex hormones. Everyone produces testosterone. Everyone produces estrogen. Even if you get your gonads removed, your body still produces a little bit from different organs elsewhere in the body. Now, you probably will need supplements if you get your gonads removed for whatever reason, be it cancer, be it accident, injury, whatever. But you're going to need exogenous hormones in order to live a normal life. And that's what we're talking about with what they call cross-sex hormones. It's just exogenous hormones, exactly the same as you would need to live a normal life if you did not have working gonads of your own for whatever reason. Once again, trans healthcare is the same as cis healthcare and done for the same reason. But it's controversial because trans people need it. And that is the real issue, is whether this minority should be given access to the healthcare that they specifically need, even though it's the same healthcare everyone else uses.
Of people who are prescribed puberty blockers go on to take cross-sex hormones, and that is the hormone that will bring on the sexual characteristics of their chosen gender. And Helen Webberley, I'm right in saying that that is irreversible once you are on cross-sex hormones?
No, and also chosen gender, very poor language. Once again, you don't choose your gender any more than you choose your sexuality. You're attracted to who you're attracted to. You are who you are. There's no choice in the matter. The only choice is whether to be happy and accept yourself or be miserable and be accepted by other people who won't accept the real you. It's a tough choice. I don't envy people going either way with that one.
Hormones.
Well, the gender affirming hormones is the word that we use, but the day you start gender affirming hormones doesn't mean that it's automatically reversible from that minute onwards, because what gender affirming hormones does in someone who is taking puberty blockers is it starts a second puberty, and that second puberty takes as long as the first puberty to fully develop, and along that trajectory then the irreversible changes will occur, which is what the patient
But along that
wants.
they're irreversible.
And when we say irreversible, that's the same level of irreversibility as endogenous puberty. You know, like if you're on testosterone and your body is able to respond to testosterone, you're likely to grow a beard. Is that irreversible? Well, from a natural perspective, yes. Like just switching back to an estrogen-based puberty or estrogen-based endocrine system, I should say, since it often happens well after puberty, if it happens at all, your beard isn't going to just disappear. but you can remove your beard the same way any other trans person does it in their first transition. And that's sort of the thing. There are cis people who have the physical characteristics of a gender not theirs that give them dysphoria, that give them dissatisfaction, sometimes to the level that something needs to be done about it. That's why we developed electrolysis. That's why we developed laser hair removal and all these other options. Because cis people need it, just like all the rest of trans healthcare. It was developed for cis people, and trans people are just using it for the same reason. But as to Joe Coburn's question, is it irreversible? Is anything ever truly irreversible? There are a few things, at least that we don't have the medical technology to fully reverse at this point, but they're the same things that we can't fully alter in the first place. For example, a phalloplasty, right? That isn't the same as a penile transplant. That is a constructed phallus that isn't quite identical to the original. And reversing it isn't really the same as doing an inversion in the first place, you know? So there are limits, absolutely. But when you're talking about kids who are on cross-sex hormones, there are ways. Absolutely, yes. And if your main concern is fertility, well, consider there are lots and lots and lots of trans people who have successfully reproduced, going in both directions. Even trans men who are on so much testosterone that you might expect their uteruses had shut down, still manage to conceive, strangely enough. There is a risk of infertility, but it's by no means a guaranteed thing. There is no absolute point of no return.
By the time you've been through a program of it. Okay.
Yeah.
And again, what age could they be prescribed at?
Well, that varies really, because puberty blockers are easy. They're the best time they're given is when puberty starts, because you want to block puberty. For gender-affirming hormones, because it is a second stage of treatment, it varies and it should be guided by individual choice.
Right. How do you regard them, Helen Joyce?
I mean, in this country, we've now banned puberty blockers, and rightly, because there's no evidence.
They have not. They've limited access to puberty blockers for kids who do not already have access to puberty blockers, and they're requiring new patients to consent to being part of a study, which is itself really unethical. But to say that puberty blockers are banned is just not true. But, lie to us some more, Helen.
Space for their use. They don't improve mental health, and there are increasing worries that they're very harmful. And we say that we don't give cross-sex hormones on the NHS until 16 and preferably 18.
Right. So if they're banned.
What she said, we covered a little bit last week, is not, strictly speaking, true. It has been shown that puberty blockers do not increase mental health, but that's not what they're supposed to do. They're puberty blockers. They're not the correct hormones, right? They prevent you from changing in a negative way. They prevent you from changing. And even Cass showed that they prevent your mental health from declining. They don't cause it to improve. That's not what they're for. They're to keep it from declining. And they do that. Cass showed that herself. The fuck do you want, Helen? You want to put a Band-Aid on a cut on your arm and have it heal a scar on your eyebrow? Oh, these Band-Aids are useless at healing scars on eyebrows. That's not what it's for.
Puberty blockers at the moment, then...
Well, Helen Joyce says again, she's not a medic, so it's very difficult to
fine,
do
and you've
this.
made that point
Thank
on many
you.
occasions.
But
But if they are
blockers-
blocked, what do you say to your patients? They can't get them now.
Sorry, so puberty blockers, there's a government ban on puberty blockers
Yes.
only in transgender children and only until the age of, I forget now whether it's 16 or 18.
And you welcome that?
No, I don't. It's tragic, absolutely tragic.
Right. Helen Joyce.
I mean, the evidence showed that they didn't do any of the things they were promised to do. Obviously, they block puberty, but they don't make the children function better mentally, and they're harmful.
Right. You obviously...
That's also not true. They are not harmful. There is no study has shown they are harmful. Unless you want to get really, really liberal with your definition of harmful, as in a child whose puberty is blocked falls behind the other children in their age group developmentally because their puberty is blocked. Which is another reason I personally wouldn't really mind losing the puberty blocker protocol and going directly to correct hormones like we used to do. Because then you get to go through the correct puberty at the same time as the rest of your cohort, shall we say.
You don't support that ban. Do you prescribe cross-sex hormones instead to young people?
The options for young people who can't have puberty blockers, the ones that are banned, which are the GnRH
Yes.
analogues, is that they can take other medicines to
GnRH agonists, but details.
suppress their natural hormone production or the effects of their natural hormone.
So are you prescribing
I don't
cross-sex
prescribe
hormones?
any. I don't prescribe any. But that's up because I don't practice as a doctor at the moment. I don't prescribe. But doctors in this country will use other medicines to suppress puberty or the effects of puberty.
Are your colleagues and partners at Gender GP prescribing cross-sex hormones?
Cross-sex hormones, yeah.
Right, even though puberty blockers are banned, and you would normally start on those and go on to cross-sex
Well,
hormones.
I don't know if you understood my answer, but there are different ways. So basically, the two necessary.
I love that she's like, I don't know if you understood what I'm just saying. If you take away a medical tool, we have to use a different medical tool because we can't just not treat a patient. Duh. This Joe is like kind of the classic Brexit voter. She's like, well, we said you can't do the first thing, so why are you doing the second thing? You can't not do something. It's like saying, there's a protocol for putting out house fires, right? Like first you show up and spray the house with fire extinguishers, CO2, to try to extinguish the fire. And if that doesn't work, then you get out the hoses because we want to save water. We want to, risk or avoid making electrical fires worse and so on and so forth. So we want water as a second step. But then you come along and you ban CO2 extinguishers. Well, we're just not going to use them then. We're still going to fight the damn fire, though. We'll just go directly to hoses. It's suboptimal, but we'll do what we have to do. And Joe's like, well, why are you still fighting the fires if you can't do step one? Like, you didn't think about this at all, did you? You have no idea what you're signing on for.
Interventions for a transgender child or adolescent are to suppress the effects of or production of the natural hormone and replace it with the opposite hormone, if we like. And there are many different ways to do that and many different schedules to do that.
Right, but without puberty blockers being prescribed because they're banned, are colleagues of yours at Gender GP prescribing cross-sex hormones to under 16-year-olds?
Well, not because of.
But are they?
Not,
All right,
yes. The doctors in this country and in Europe are prescribing
to under
gender-affirming
16-year-olds?
hormones to under 16-year-olds.
How young?
Well,
No, it should be noted, physicians are prescribing correct hormones to under 16s who are not trans. Also, like previously mentioned, for instance, if a 15-year-old girl wants to get on birth control, she usually can. And that's what that is hormones.
I don't know how young, I don't know, but whenever it's medically indicated to do that, this isn't about age. Everyone uses the age thing as the alarmist thing. Oh my goodness, that's too young. But don't forget that puberty progresses. And if we don't intervene, what you end up with is life-altering, irreversible effects of the other hormone. So it's like the same life-changing, irreversible effects of.
Right. These gender criticals, shall we say, they like to bemoan life-changing alterations and whatnot. But the thing of it is, you get a puberty, regardless of what you want or what Helen Joyce wants or what Joe Colburn wants. You're going to go through one puberty or the other. So do we give the child the one that will benefit them, or do we give them the one that will harm them and make their life much more difficult later? This should be a no-brainer. But we've got so much propaganda and so much bullshit and so much fear-mongering coming out of Helen Joyce and her other conspiracy theorists that people don't know what the hell to think. And we live in a time when people believe that the vibes of the outraged molten snowflakes should outweigh the data of the experts who actually specialize in these fields. We have a bit of a problem. It's an illiteracy problem. It really is an illiteracy problem. Here in the United States, we have a shockingly high functional illiteracy rate, but we're not just talking about literal literacy. We're talking about media literacy. the ability to see propaganda for what it is, or scientific literacy, the ability to understand what studies mean, what they say, what the results of experimentation shows us. The public, broadly speaking, are fucking illiterate, and they're taking the words of the loudest, most glaring assholes out there over the people who know what they're talking about. Exhibit A, this debate.
The hormone that we prescribe, if you don't do it, you end up with the life-altering, irreversible effects of the hormone from the natural body.
I mean, I don't know how many times I can say that people are either male or female and sex can't change. So if you give a male person...
And she's just wrong. Like, I mean, this is her whole thing. This is her job. She is actually a paid agitator, you might say, to say there is only male and female and sex can't change. That's two statements, and they're both factually not true. For instance, intersex people exist. Behold, here I am existing and whatnot. There's quite a lot of us, in fact. It's not just male or female. And as far as changing, what do you mean, right? Because while we can't change genes, the genes aren't doing the reproducing or being selected in an evolutionary sense. It's phenotype that gets selected for, not genotype. That's another thing Helen doesn't know as a mathematician because it's biology 101. But never mind that. You can change your phenotype. You can change your physical expression. You can, in fact, if you want to get right down to the root of what people mean when they talk about sex, change the anatomy. So what do you mean you can't change? Are you talking about irrelevant things that have nothing to do with anything? Or are you talking about the functional parts, the things that do matter for human interaction or evolutionary selection? What do you mean?
Female hormones. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean that they go through female puberty. A male person can't go through female puberty. So the pathway that Helen Webberley is describing is a path.
A male person absolutely could go through female puberty if they happen to be a male person and you gave them estrogen and suppressed their testosterone. I assure you, they will get a female puberty. And the reason we know that is because there are people with androgen insensitivity. There are people who naturally don't respond to testosterone that their body produces anyway. And yeah, they go through a female puberty. Oops.
Way that leads to adult sterility. Your own sex organs will not develop. I mean,
was that answering your question? Because we seem to have gone back to the fact that gender identity doesn't exist, and now we're straight back on
the word sterility here. So this
but are you saying there are no side effects, and that none of the patients that you have treated have ever suffered the sorts of side effects that Helen Joyce has just outlined?
I mean, I don't know how balanced this is becoming, but the side effects of gender-affirming hormones are the effects that that person wants. So, for example, somebody who is given
right, is it a side effect if it's the goal?
Helen calls it you can't have a female puberty. Okay, let's call it an estrogen puberty.
Right.
And the effects of the estrogen puberty are the effects that the person wants.
Well, you say that that's what they want. Kira Bell was
we're going to go
an
on
example.
Again, we're going to go on to a case of one, which is really different.
Yes, let's talk about the anecdote of one case that has been wildly misrepresented in UK media instead of, the science. And this is the thing we see all the damn time from the TERFs. Granted, in fairness, it's not Helen Joyce this time. It's Joe Coburn, who's supposedly the neutral moderator bringing up the TERF talking points. But here we are. They like to say how the science says this or the science doesn't confirm that. But when pressed, they bring up one anecdote that's been so wildly misrepresented. I would be very much surprised if she got any facts of the case correct. But, who needs facts when you've got a great emotionally manipulative story to tell?
These are a lot of cases, though, aren't they? I mean, I've pulled out a few.
Could we talk about the 262,000 people in this country, or do we just want to talk about one?
That sounds like you're dismissing. But Kira Bell went to court. The puberty blockers that I received at 16 were designed to stop my sexual maturation. The idea was that this would give me a pause to think about whether I wanted to continue to a further gender transition.
Worth noting, I'm just going to take at face value what Joe is reading. Maybe it's testimony from the case. Maybe it is actually accurate. Fine. Kira Bell says I was given puberty blockers at 16. Why in the world would Joe Coburn or Helen Joyce be up in arms over that? Because that's much later than both WPATH and Helen Webberley say a person should be given puberty blockers. What's the issue?
This so-called pause put me into what felt like menopause with hot flushes, night sweats and brain fog. All this made it more difficult to think clearly about what I should do. By the end of a year of this treatment, when I was presented with the option of moving on to testosterone, I jumped at it. I wanted to feel like a young man, not an old woman. I was eager for the shots to start and the changes this would bring. But it's very clear that they weren't thinking clearly. Does it give you pause for thought, Helen Webberley?
Well, you see, Kira Bell went through the Tavistock. The Tavistock didn't, and what the Tavistock said was, regardless of your age, you must have puberty blockers for a year before gender-affirming hormones.
And that was wrong.
And that's what Kira Bell had. So Kira Bell did.
That's an excellent point. There's a lot of countries, including the US, where there's still a lot of hoops to jump through, even if you're an adult trans person. While a lot of places and clinics have shifted over to an informed consent model, there's still a lot of places, partially due to insurance reasons, where you have to jump through ridiculous amounts of hoops. For example, one of the surgeries I need, I have to have 2 letters from different providers, one of whom has to be a psychiatrist, affirming that the person I have been for several years is me. It's just gatekeeping. Fucking hell.
Did have an estrogen menopause and then had to endure that for a year and then had testosterone. But that's not what, if you have a look at the Endocrine Society guidelines and WPATH standards of care, that's not
right. What she's describing is this is what happens when you make kids wait until they're already most of the way through their endogenous puberty. If you gave her puberty blockers at the correct age, she wouldn't have started puberty and then stopped it and experienced these symptoms. This is why you should do things the correct way. You can't break the system and say, oh, we're going to make you wait until you're 16 to pause your puberty, and then point at that and be like, see, pausing puberty doesn't work. Not then. You can't give puberty blockers to a 20-year-old either. It's not going to be very effective because they've already pubertied.
That's not the clinical guidance that they would have done.
Did it give you pause for thought,
and
though, that case?
And that is what was criticised by the CAS review and the Care Quality Commission, because they weren't following standards.
Does that reassure you?
I mean, if I can give a big number, 96% of female people who take testosterone for gender-affirming care will get pelvic floor dysfunction. I'd very much like to know if that is what is said to them, because it's very bad for female sex organs.
Where does that stat come from? Can we have that clearly?
That comes from a paper by a physiotherapist who has looked into it because she treats a lot of them. I can provide you with the source afterwards, since clearly you need to know it. But obviously, it is not good for female sex organs to have testosterone.
But again,
plot twist: female sex organs, like we mentioned earlier, are exposed to testosterone. Every human makes both testosterone and estrogen and progesterone and a whole bunch of other hormones besides, because humans need them, all of them.
You know, do you talk to your patients about that? That sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Of course we discuss all of those things.
Right.
But pelvic floor dysfunction...
To a 12-year-old, would they know necessarily what that means and what effect that might have later in life?
Well, you're back to the gender-affirming care in 12-year-olds. So the 12-year-old is on puberty blockers. I've never heard this statistic that's come forward. How many patients were in this study? Do you know?
I asked a friend who did the study, so I'd have to come back to you.
Okay.
Elaine Miller, she's an extremely well-known physiologist.
You might find a study that's got 8 people. I don't know.
Helen Miller? I mean, maybe she's well known. I certainly don't know every physician on the planet. More's the pity. Let's see. Helene. I don't know if that'll come up based on a my guess at the spelling. Let's see. Helen Miller. Researcher, I guess. Let's see what happens. That brings us University of Cincinnati, a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing and American Heart Association, probably not so much. PhD candidate. Early life experiences can impact the development of the dopamine system. No, probably not. University of Cincinnati again. Gender studies. Elaine Miller. Okay. What do we got? Let's open this and see what we've got here. Women and Gender Studies, an associate professor emeritus in foreign languages and cultures. Great, we're off to a great start. Fantastic. Established the scholarship in her name to recognize outstanding student in Department of Women and Gender Studies or in the Department of Modern Languages at SUNY Brockport. Okay, I'm gonna say probably not so much, right? Like, she worked in languages and cultures, and she realized there needs to be more opportunity for women, particularly in gender studies, and so she created a scholarship to that effect. Not anything to do with her specific research. I'll try to find the person Helen is talking about later when we're not on the air, but like, I didn't share the tab, did I? I'm bad at my job. This was what I was looking at, the SUNY Brockport donors thing. Elaine K. Miller, Women and Gender Studies. So that's what that is. But yeah, we're not going to spend all day trying to track down this person who may or may not even exist that Helen Joyce is vaguely hand waving at.
I've not seen this study. And you might say, oh goodness, 94%, so maybe 7 of them had pelvic floor dysfunction. But what you have to understand is that if medics go on proper research and guidance and
Right.
standards that are peer reviewed, not one single paper that you can find, which may have a very tiny number of cases, that shows what the other side wants to see.
I know. Oh, yes, go on.
The CAS review is the systematic review here, and it just doesn't show that this pathway has evidence behind it.
Can I bring up another case? I know you think.
Once again, CAS review, kind of bullshit for a whole bunch of reasons. And there's references for that on my website too, betterthanember.com, the gender site tab. There's at least one document of researchers at Yale, for example, just dismantling the nonsense. And I'm pretty sure there's another. It's been a minute since I checked. I'm always adding new resources, but I don't like relook at all the resources that are on there every day. They're there for reference purposes, not so I can reread them daily, you know? But yeah, it's laughable. Literally, the experts in the field laugh at it. It is so bad. I mean, the level of detail, the sheer volume of incompetence in CAS, which once again is not peer reviewed, is staggering. Every image in the damn thing is AI. Half of them have too many fingers. Like, it is the lowest tier made up bullshit you've ever seen. But I digress.
I'm picking cases, but I'm trying to give a sense of cases that have come to light that have gone through the courts. Let me just, can I just do it, and then you can say
to the rest of the population when you use one case.
or is it highlighting it? I mean, you're a champion.
While Joe is highlighting and championing and things, we are joined by the one and only legendary BumbleBre of the Hiveside channel. You may recall Bree was with us for part 1. I was hoping she'd join for part 2. There was some kind of miscommunication with time zones. Frickin' time zones. See, planetary time would solve this issue, but
it's
hooray.
fine. Yeah, Ember said those set this for 7 p.m. and I'm like, okay. And obviously I'm thinking 7 p.m. my time, but that didn't make any sense to the rest of the sentence anyway, because then she was like, and then we can send her on over to Maya, and I know Maya starts before that, so yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's
So
all
I
right.
apologize, baby. I apologize. I'm here now, though. I'm not going to come on camera because I played on. I set my alarm for this time to like get ready and do my makeup and stuff. So I'm in goblin mode outside. Look at me, goblin mode. Ah! Sorry if that was scary.
It's
If
all
you
good.
take if there
I
was
kind of
small.
feel the
We're
same way
watching.
myself.
I
To do a little
apologize.
bit of an interlude, I had one of my get shot in the face with a high-powered laser thing, and I didn't even get to hang out with Dr. Tapioca Weasel for it. But yeah, so I have no makeup on today because my face cannot have. I can have aloe, and that's it. You know.
Well,
so yeah, we're just kind of
I'm glad you're getting it taken care of, though.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll be in my future too. So
it's progress. It's definitely been getting better. like for the past several months, I don't go out of the house nearly as much as I used to. Something anxiety, but that's a whole other thing notwithstanding. When I do leave the house, I worry about how I look less than I used to, because it's reached the point where like the average person around me has more facial hair than me, regardless of what's between their legs. So
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully I'll get there. I just probably gonna wait till after I move before I start. I had mentioned starting a fundraiser for it, to do some electrolysis myself or laser or whatever. But I'm putting it off until I get moved. But we do have some wonderful people out there. Have you said hi to everybody? I know you've been going for like an hour and a half, but
I know I've been trying to just nail this damn thing down before Maya starts. We are going to run over a little bit, but this stream will take you over to Maya's when we do wrap up here. So
it looks like we got less than 10 minutes left on the video, though.
Yeah, 4 minutes. And I don't know how much of the end of it is Joe just saying, hey, join us next week for our guests, Richard Dawkins, who's going to talk about how gay people are ruining Christianity or some shit,
Yeah.
Fucking wild. But yeah, thank you all so much for joining. It's lovely to see you all. I've been highlighting comments and occasionally talking about one here and there, but so it's a bit of a thing. Like with these kinds of shows, I tend to like railroad the point for maximum rewatchability. Like we just cover the topic and then we're done. But I also want to have like some kind of Q&A sort of thing so that people can ask questions. Maybe that needs to be like a dedicated show though. I don't know. I'm still juggling things. We'll figure it out.
This, and you've been able to defend yourself. Let me give you this case. Let's look at the case that was examined in the family court in the UK. Gender GP prescribed testosterone to a child known as Jay, who had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and had a history of anorexia. In fact, had spent 9 months in hospital under the Mental Health Act because of malnutrition. Jay came to you aged 14, and with 3. It just comes under Jay.
No, which court was this, and which country was this? Because that's
the family court. Family court in the UK. It was the family division here. I'll just finish. Jay came to you age...
The UK, it should be noted, does not answer which country. Because like it's the whole thing. The whole thing is the UK, England and Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. Like which country though? But whatever.
Used to be a lot more of them.
It's true. There definitely were. But like there's a bunch of things I could say, but the main thing is a person can be autistic and trans. They're not mutually exclusive. Like this is thing. I know. Like yes, there is a slightly higher incidence rate of autistic people also being trans, because autistic people often see right through social expectation bullshit, and they're like,
that's what I was ready to say. Yeah, it's like when they don't seem to fight as a person with autism doesn't seem to fight as hard against their very nature, because society has different expectations. Like a cis person does. Like me and Ember spent over 30 years doing so.
Adventures. I mean,
I wish my tism had been stronger. Your tism was too weak.
I know. I need more tism. The thing is, from early childhood, I made no bones about the fact that I knew my gender identity. It's just when adults said, no, you can't do that. No, that's not possible. No, that's not a thing that really happens. No, all the news stories about, the GI blonde bombshell from the 1950s, all the way up through the Jerry Springer show in the 90s and early 2000s. Those are all fictional. Like when everyone around you lies to you constantly about whether that's a possible thing you can do, you start to believe them,
You know, they didn't convince me it was fictional. They convinced me it was depraved. They're like, oh, you can't. And so, like, I knew that I was like that, but like, I thought there was like something wrong with me and it was bad. I didn't know it was just a way humans could be. I was like, it was like,
Yeah.
right up there. I mean, it wouldn't have been any different than somebody who, if I find out that, oh, you're somebody who likes to get it on with animals or something, you know, it's put into that category in people's stupid heads. Oh,
Isn't it weird that the same people who like slippery slope minority people existing are the very people doing the horrible things that they allege will be the inevitable outcome of their slippery slope? Like,
yeah,
we can't let gay people get married because then what? Pedophiles in the White House? Oh, look.
everybody could end up at the bottom of the slope, and then yeah. Oh God, don't get me started on the Epstein file stuff because I'm
We'll be
absolutely
here all
disgusted.
night.
Let's see how much we can get through with this before we have to send everybody to Maya's. I'm sure we can kind of finish it up, but
Oh yeah, we're down to 3 minutes.
14 and within 3 months was prescribed testosterone. And I suppose the question is, did you order any blood tests or bone x-rays before prescribing gender-affirming hormones to Jay?
I don't know this case, and it's not my.
Yeah, what do you mean, did you order? Like, this is a random case where we don't even have the name to look it up. It's just an initial. But also, like, what makes you think, did you order this? It's not my case. I don't know. But also, as a matter of course, no, you don't typically blood test people before you start hormone care, because that's not really relevant. Your hormones are going to change as soon as you're on hormones. You test them after to make sure they're in the general correct range, and then you adjust them to make sure they stay in the general correct range. And as far as x-rays, why in the ever-loving fuck would you x-ray a person? Like, do you get x-rays before you get birth control? Why would you do that, you know?
It's not my patient. I don't know the ins and outs of this case.
Would you have done if someone had come presented to you with those issues, those conditions,
issues, sorry?
autism spectrum disorder and a history of anorexia? Would you have ordered blood tests or bone x-rays before?
I'm interested. What do you think the blood test would have shown with the autism and anorexia and gender dysphoria? Because they don't show up on a blood test and they don't show up on a brain scan. And this again is when we've got people.
Well, an independent expert looked at Jay's medical notes and
Who
said
was
that
the
Jay was
expert?
at an independent expert was at
You see,
risk
we need
of
to understand. It's really-
sudden death.
Yeah, but if
But
we're
it
going to do
sounds like
this-
you are trying to split hairs, Helen Webberley, instead of saying, yeah,
Does it? Does it sound like Helen Webberley is trying to split hairs? Like, what do you expect to show up on an x-ray? What do you mean?
yeah, like what are they looking for on the X-ray? Are they?
Does it say trans written across your freaking ribs? Does it say anorexic written on your hip bones? Like, what are you looking for?
You'll just try to split hairs, dear.
Fucking hell.
yes, we would have done all the due diligence that was necessary.
The due diligence is dictated by W. Path and Endocrine Society. You can talk about splitting hairs with one patient who might have had autism and anorexia, but by using that one case to dictate or let all of your listeners decide whether gender affirming care and gender incongruence, gender affirming care is the right thing to do and gender incongruence exists, it's really unhelpful to use one case when there are hundreds and millions of transgender people across the world.
The family court
Hundreds in
says
this.
that child was put on testosterone at such a high level that they were at risk of sudden death.
Can I just wrap this?
That's not what Joe just said, but also, what? Such a high level of testosterone, even if that were true, that you did have a child who was on such a high level of testosterone, they were at risk of sudden death. That kind of implies that they were given far too much testosterone, which is not in keeping with guidelines. What are we? But what does that mean to be on so much testosterone you're at risk of sudden death? Like, I could see maybe a case being made for something like, estrogen does have a relationship with blood clotting. It's not a direct causative factor, but more estrogen does increase your risk of blood clots. There's a correlation. So maybe if your estrogen were too ridiculously high, you might be at risk of sudden death from blood clots. But what does that mean?
this up because we haven't got much time left by asking a question to both of you, but starting with you, Helen Joyce. If we go back to the beginning and we look at the interpretation from the Supreme Court ruling, you used the word "we've won" or "we've won that case." Do you think it is time to be generous to the transgender community, to be a bit more benevolent, perhaps, to the sort of work that Helen Webberley is doing or not?
I think the work that Helen Webberley is doing is absolutely malevolent. I think she's doing enormous harm to children.
I think the same thing is not just my opinion. It's objectively demonstrable that Helen Joyce's work is malevolent, that she is intentionally and aggressively doing a great deal of harm to children and women and society and, you know, intellectual discourse and science and like, holy shit, I could go on for a while.
I
take a line of disagreeing with that one.
I think that the kindest thing to do to people who identify as trans is absolutely not to give them evidence-free, harmful medicine. And I think that's what she's doing. And this type of care is not going to.
Right. Giving them care that is the opposite of what's indicated by you know, science, by medical research, giving them the opposite of what is proven to be healthy, helpful, and improving their overall well-being, that would be monstrous. So denying trans kids access to trans healthcare is monstrous. Yes, that is correct, Helen Joyce. I'm glad we finally agree. If only she could be persuaded. Like all conspiracy theorists, like all pseudoscientists, you can't convince them with facts because they didn't use reason to get into that position in the first place. You can't reason them out of it.
Last, it is going to be looked back on with horror.
Do you agree with that? Do you think it will be looked back in horror?
I think absolutely not. I think this present time in history is going to look back in horror when there are thousands and thousands of transgender people not accepted, hurting, being harmed by these kind of views.
Thank you to both of you. That's all we have time for.
Thank you.
And while it's a weird time, like it's a 48-minute interview, the clock that they're showing on the video, I realize it's very small for many of you folks, but the real time in live clock for them, the top of the hour and time to start the next show. So that's why they end there. So yeah, fabulous, amazing, wonderful, etc. And the good news is it's just about time for us to send people over to Maya's for tonight's adventure. Oh, what is the show tonight over at Maya's? It's for anybody who isn't familiar, Bad Science Sunday is what we're talking about, which in my opinion is one of the very best things on all of the YouTubes, and it is difficult to locate. There it is. Okay, today's subject is spiritual warfare and the solar cycle 25 with a guest. Oh, it's Oz and Jenna. It says the teacup on the thing, and I had to like look and see that it's Oz and Jenna. So yeah, it should be fun. It should be delightful.
Should be fun. Yeah.
Hell yeah. So good times. I hope y'all stick around, and yeah, thank you all so much for joining. These shows they're a little bit unpredictable. They get a little bit feisty sometimes, but you can always join us for our much more chill shows every weekday at 11 a.m. Eastern, Learn Together Live, where we, learn things instead of just debunk pseudoscience, although sometimes that comes up too, plus bonus shows as often as I can manage, and also join both Brie and I potentially, plus other secular women for Java and Jugs, Mondays at 9 a.m. Eastern. Here and a bunch of other channels, plus more stuff in the works. All my links are on betterthanember.com. Bree's show, Hive Sci, Live from the Hive, is the live show Saturday mornings, 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. Make sure you're subscribed over there because there's cryptids and critters and weirdness and delightful sciencey goodness. And, you're guaranteed.
Sometimes vampires too, just so you know.
Sometimes, yes. All right. Thank you all so much for joining. We'll catch most of you in the chat over at Maya's, and we will see you again very, very soon. Good night.
Mwah.
Thanks to all our patrons and top-level members for January. Miranda, Karen Butcher, Jessica the Transmetal Alchemist, Robin Webster, Maya Adkisson, Jimmy Tux, Ian Chen, Lilith, Ember Lynn, The Barely Bearable Atheist, Eric Wander, Jason Jacoby, Lil of All Trades, Deviant Outcast, Secular Feelinist, Kelly King, the Detroit Atheist Queen, Geo Sam, Thriver Scapegoat, and Godless Engineer. And you can add your name here next month by signing up at patreon.com/betterthanember or by joining Emberships here on YouTube at the Cinder level, which also includes all the custom emojis, tons of member-exclusive content, member-only live streams, and a bunch of other stuff. I deeply appreciate all the supporters who keep this channel going. Thank you all so much. Because of you, we are building a wonderful community that I'm very proud of.
Just like a spark that's breaking